Hello, this is James from XRobots.co.uk. This is part 2 of hopefully getting the world record for the largest 3D printed sculpture of a human in the world. So I've done the head and shoulders, which we did in part 1, and that's looking pretty good, and now we're going to work our way down the body. Now it's really important to say that the filament for this project is sponsored by 3D Filler Print, and the printers are sponsored by Lolzbot, and I'm using the Lolzbot TAS6 with the Moore extruders. So last time I left you with the last 2 shoulder sections that need sticking on there, and I'm sticking everything together with super glue and super glue activator that makes it go off really quick. So we'll get those stuck on and we can look at the next layer down. Right, it's all stuck together. It's actually pretty heavy though, I need to weigh it. I'm a bit concerned about that. So we're going to try and make some of the pieces going down a bit lighter. And we're going to do that by cutting a massive hole in it basically and using far less infill. So the parts so far are about 4% infill and a single wall. These we're going to go down to 2% because essentially they're basically just vertical towers. So we haven't got too many issues there of having overhangs. The arms I'm actually going to make separately so we can get rid of those for now. But we're going to concentrate basically on this middle section and try to get that done. So you'll notice that in fact the next section down also has a hole in, and what we're going to do is actually have a separation there so that we can move it around and transport it, and we're basically going to have a plug that sticks out of the bottom piece into the top of that piece so that they can plug on top of each other, so that'll actually be a split in the part. I'm a bit concerned about this piece here, or the sort of overhang under the arm. So some of these I'm going to try printing upside down. So this is a top surface, and some of them I'm actually going to try support material, so we'll have some breakaway scaffolding that helps hold that up while it's being printed. So here's one with support material, and you can just about see it's just printing on the support material there, so we'll see how that turns out. Well, it's some time later and it seems to have continued printing the part on the support material here, which is right underneath. So that's looking pretty good. We'll have to take the support material off when it's done and see how it turns out. Still a little bit sticking out, so this contour continues up, supported by it. These are 2 of the other parts. The one on the right is an upside down one with that other arm hook, and the one on the left is a fairly simple tower, which is mainly just a vertical tower. And that is what 2% infill looks like, but obviously there's not too much it needs to support. So here are those first 3 parts, and obviously the tall tower there, that's come out absolutely fine, no problems with that one. This is the one that was printed upside down with that overhang for the arm there. That seems to have come out really well actually, it's not too bad. So I probably could have done that with both pieces, although the other one was slightly trickier. And that's the one I printed the right way up with support material that we now need to break out. So that's all support material, and we should be able to just snap that off. I don't know how cleanly it's going to come away. It looks pretty good so far. It's pretty tough actually in that stuff. Well, it's definitely put the surface on. It's pretty clean, it's not amazing, but it's pretty good for printed on support. There we go, need to do a bit more cleanup, but that seems to be alright. Okay, so here are all 6 parts that make up that layer. I've glued the back together, the front needs to be glued together, and then what goes on top is obviously the head and shoulders we've got, and this hole here makes the socket so it plugs onto the layer below. Right, I'm just waiting for that glue to go off. This is massively strong as well. Right, the next section down is pretty unexciting. It's another 6 pieces that look very similar to the previous one, but we're going to stick some plates in here that stick up so we can make a plug and socket. We'll get that printed and hopefully the hole lines up. Here come 2 of those parts out of 6. They're pretty uninteresting, pretty much vertical tower parts. There's going to be quite a few parts like this in the body and pretty much the legs as well when we get there, so not too much intricate detail, just pretty much the fabric of my jeans and t-shirt. So here's 5 of those pieces. The one on the front is missing, and that's because I printed this piece twice and didn't notice till it was done. So I'm just waiting for the last piece to arrive and we can glue those together. And these of course come together. There's a hole in the middle and we need to attach something in there that plugs into the main section above. So I'm going to make these 2 flat panels which have tapered tops and stick those into the sides, and that will allow me to hopefully easily locate the top section onto them. It should slide down and locate nicely on the back and front, and of course it won't move sideways either because these will act as sides. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's get those printed and see how it all assembles. So here's one of those locking plates coming. The other printer's doing the other one, which is slightly narrower. I've used about 10% infill for these, so they're a bit stronger because they need to not snap really or be too bendy. So these parts are now printed and stuck on, and that makes a tapered plug so the section above can slot on, and that should hold it nice and stable. Right, so now these fit into here, and that means the two sections can be fitted together. So that seems pretty good, shouldn't come apart, at least when it's standing there, but it means I can disassemble it for transport. This is the next layer down from that, not very exciting, so I didn't film the printing. Pretty much still the straight tower till we get to the waist and the legs. Feels like we're getting there. As soon as this is as tall as me, that means we've done half of it pretty much, and it's going to be twice my height. So pretty happy with that so far. Seems pretty stable. I won't try and stand on its shoulders because it's pretty high and I don't want to fall over. So the next layer down is a bit more interesting. It's where I've got the join between my t-shirt and my jeans, so there's a bit of an overhang there. So I'm not sure how it's going to print in such a sparse infill with that single wall and the only two top and bottom layers. So what I'm actually going to do is divide the piece up. So we've got these pieces are printed, and I'm going to make a thin waist belt piece that I'm going to print separately so I can do that in a much denser infill. Here's a piece of that shorter layer, and that's pretty normal. It's 2% infill as before, and obviously it's printing okay. So for that waist belt section, I'm going to do a much thinner section so I don't waste filament if it doesn't work out. But what I've basically done is change the slicer settings, so we've got a bottom top thickness, which is 2.4mm instead of 1.2, and I've gone down to a 0.5mm layer height. So it should find that overhang there, where it comes and does a top surface, much better there. I've also done 5% infill instead of 2%, so hopefully that should print okay. Now I wouldn't be worried too much if it were the top of the head or something, because no one will see it, although I printed those parts in a different orientation to make sure they're okay, but the waist belt is going to be just above eye height for most people, so we really need to make sure that's good quality. Here's my first test piece for the smallest part. That top surface seems to be going okay with those extra top perimeters. I've got 5% infill, but actually there's pretty much nothing propping this up inside, so it has bridged the gap okay, so we could probably reduce that. So here are those belt sections. Obviously it's upside down, so this is actually an overhang, but all those pieces have come out really well. They're all really quite solid chunky bits of plastic due to the extra tops and bottom surfaces and the finer layer height there. So we need to get that glued together, and then we're on to the legs after that. Alright, so that piece goes the other way up, so my top overhangs of course as it gets bigger in the body, and that piece goes on the bottom of there. So I'm not sure whether this should be attached to the body, which is almost as tall as me, which means we're halfway there, or whether it should go on the top of the legs. This is quite a chunky piece because of the extra infill and the extra layers, so I may put this on the top of the legs as long as they fit under the ceiling so I can assemble it, and that means I won't have so much to lift on top when I come to assemble it. We'll have another seam as well, so at the moment we've of course got that split where I can take this piece off, and on the bottom of this piece there'll be another plug that plugs into the legs. So the next section down is again a pretty unexciting one. It's mostly vertical. We don't get to any overhangs till we get to the next section down, and that'll probably have to be slightly better quality again to account for that part there. So I'm not too bothered though, because basically the legs are going to stand on the ground, so provided I can physically pick them up and move them, it doesn't matter how heavy they are, whereas the other sections I wanted to make really light because they need to stand on top and I don't want it to be top heavy. So we're pretty much on a home straight now, and after that of course we need to do the arms. Here are the pieces for that layer, and this is where it starts to just split for the legs, and that's where we need to be really careful. This is the next section down where it does split for the legs, so those two pieces in the middle have what would be a massive overhang if it were the right way up, so I think I'm going to print this in a slightly lower layer height, maybe a 0.5mm, and with a denser infill, and print them upside down basically so that these things are printing on the top surface. So here's the first piece of that centre section. It looks like the bridge has worked okay and it's met the other side with no issues. Yep, looking pretty good. So here are my pants basically, so that's looking pretty good. So this is a pretty solid section. I've glued that waist belt piece on as well, which is of course heavier, but this will be attached to the legs and stand on the ground, so I'm not too worried about the mass here. I do need another section to go on top, so we need to make another lock, and that will take the body section. So I've installed another 2 of those lock pieces there so we can slot the section on above. So if I take the top off here, of course I haven't got space now under the ceiling to put all this together. This one should fit neatly on here. Yep, there we go. And then of course this would go on top. But yeah, I can't get that on top in here. So I've also printed some of the leg parts, and these are pretty simple parts which are just cut into quarters there. So really simplistic, easy to print. They're all in a single wall and 2% infill again. And of course we've just basically printed those. I've got to carry on down to the ankles. We're about 2 sections away from the feet. So that's most of the legs done. So that's the end of part 2. Don't forget the filament is sponsored by 3D Filaprint and the printers are sponsored by Lulzbot, and thanks to Portsmouth University for doing the scan. Check out part 1 for more on that. Next time we're going to be working our way down, putting the feet on, putting the arms on, and also putting a base on it to make it super stable because it has to be self-supporting and freestanding. And we're also going to do some cosmetic finishing. That's all for now.